Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking a story of survival that honestly absolutely defies the odds. We're going to chart the incredible journey of Timor Leste, from a divided, frequently overlooked colony all the way to becoming the world's youngest democracy. Right, so let's dive into this. How exactly does one of the world's youngest nations survive literally centuries of occupation to finally win its freedom? To answer that, we really have to wrap our heads around a level of human resilience that's almost unbelievable. I mean, think about the monumental task of building a state entirely from scratch in the 21st century. Well, let's actually start with the name itself, Timor Leste. It translates to Timor Sun Rising. I love starting here, because it establishes such a hopeful tone right from the get-go. It's a really vibrant contrast to the pretty dark historical chapters we're about to explore. It's an identity completely centered on the dawn of a new day. But before we get into the history, let's look at the canvas. Timor-Leste's geography is stark, it's tropical, and man, is it remarkably rugged. You've got these soaring interior mountains, peaking at almost 3,000 meters, and then transitioning down to salt marshes, coastal mountains, and these fertile lowlands. Because it's so mountainous, the population density is intensely concentrated in these narrow river valleys. It's like a giant geographic puzzle. But as stunning as this landscape is, it became the theater for a really brutal history. Part 1. Centuries of Foreign Rule. So, for hundreds of years, this island was essentially treated as a geopolitical prize. Back in the 16th century, Portuguese navigators show up and claim the island. Then, by 1859, there's this dual colonial bargain that literally splits it right down the middle. The Dutch take the west, the Portuguese keep the east. Fast forward to World War II, you get a Japanese military invasion, which is then followed decades later by an Indonesian invasion in 1975. So, generation after generation, the Timorese were systematically denied self-rule. And the human cost of these waves of occupation? It was absolutely devastating. 30%. Think about that. It is estimated that at least 30% of the Timorese population perished between 1942 and 1950. That was due to the brutal Japanese occupation and its totally chaotic aftermath. It's a completely sobering reality, and that's before their modern struggle even really begins. Part 2. The 24-year occupation. Okay, so following the sudden fall of Portugal's dictatorship in 1974, a massive, dangerous power vacuum opens up in Timor. And out of this, two main political factions emerge. On one side, you have Frechulin. They were a revolutionary, Marxist-leaning movement with huge rural support, and they were pushing hard for total independence. On the other side is the UDT, an anti-communist faction that ultimately wound up aligning with the Indonesian government. As you might guess, these competing visions quickly escalated into a brief civil war. Then comes December 7th, 1975. Taking full advantage of that internal chaos, Indonesian forces invade. They captured the entire country in a mere 24 hours. Now, the source material points out that international powers, including Australia and the US, essentially allowed this to happen. Why? Well, it was largely driven by their own Cold War fears of a leftist government taking root in the region. The sheer scale of the resulting occupation is it's difficult to grasp. Based on demographic data, an average of 15,000 Timorese died each month early in the invasion. That human cost, the violence, the famine, the massive displacement, it's almost beyond words. For years, all of his brutality was largely hidden from the global stage. But then came the 1991 Santa Cruz massacre. Peaceful, pro-independence demonstrators were tragically killed at a cemetery in the capital city of Dili, but this time it was captured on film. So the crucial point is that this specific, heartbreaking tragedy became the turning point. It finally exposed the reality of the occupation to the world, and it sparked this massive, unstoppable international solidarity movement. Part 3. The Road to Independence. 78%. Driven by mounting global pressure, a historic UN-backed referendum was held in 1999, and an incredible 78% of the population stepped right up and voted for independence. And they did this despite very real, very public threats of violence from pro-integration forces. It was just an undeniable display of democratic will. But as we see from the sources, that victory came at a terrible price. Pro-integration militias immediately launched a swift, scorched earth retaliation. We're talking massive displacement, citizens forced to flee into the mountains or cross borders. Militias systematically destroyed vital national infrastructure, burning buildings, destroying records. It escalated so fast, the whole situation, that the United Nations actually had to send in multinational peacekeeping forces just to restore order.
Part 4. Building a New Nation.
Now, to really understand this rebirth, you have to look at the concept of the Tayudo. It's this traditional cultural ritual that symbolizes the ceremonial destruction of the old order to create a new, harmonious one. Normally, it's used in village death ceremonies, but as a metaphor, and this brilliantly illustrates the nation's mindset perfectly. The old occupied order had to be completely cleansed from the ashes, so a new era of self-rule could finally begin.
And that new era, it officially kicked off on May 20, 2002. Timor Leste officially became the 191st member of the United Nations, and they elected independence leader Xanana Gusmão as our first president. It's just wild to think that this incredibly complex state-building effort, literally building a government entirely from the ground up, is actively happening right now in our lifetimes.
Part 5. Economy, Culture, and Future.
Let's move to today and see how this builds out into their economic reality, because the nation does face some deep structural challenges. Currently, Timorese oil and gas is the dominant source of state revenue, but they are in an urgent race against time to diversify before those finite resources run out. So looking ahead to their 2030 plan, the goal is to manage that wealth carefully to prevent corruption. They want to shift from largely subsistence farming into labor-intensive food processing to employ their youth. And they're aiming to attract large-scale private investment to build up their underdeveloped tourism sector. But despite those economic hurdles and despite decades of severe oppression, the Timorese spirit remains totally unbroken. They've preserved these vibrant oral traditions, poetry, and riddles that are literally still performed today. Traditional ties weaving isn't just a museum piece. It's actively evolving into contemporary designs. Plus, they have this really unique musical fusion that seamlessly blends indigenous bamboo and string instruments with historical Portuguese styles. Which leaves us with a really powerful question. What is the true price of building a nation from scratch? And what future awaits a people who sacrificed absolutely everything for freedom? Timor-Leste's journey from a divided colony to a sovereign democracy is a profound reminder of the limits of empire and, honestly, the limitless nature of human resilience. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it leaves you curious to learn even more.